Derrick, it is great to have you on the show. The process fixer, Mr. Process Triage. This is going to be easy. I mean, I'm all into systems because that's what I realized was I had leadership attributes, but no skills. And probably the
Yeah.
biggest thing was no systems. So I don't know whether you want to
Yeah.
give the audience a little background on yourself
Yeah.
briefly before we dive in, but I'm sure this is going to be great.
Yeah. So I have been doing process work for about 20 years. Originally started in sustainability. I was working on recycling initiatives with some of the biggest companies in the world and really started to understand this end of life producer responsibility of where does the responsibility end? Is it when you sell the product? But then what happens if the customer does something wrong with it? So that really got me involved in this sort of systems thinking and working with bigger organizations at that time, big global organizations, and really thinking about the before and the after. And that really got me into this concept of process mapping. And then it really became my career. I did some private equity work and I was a COO for private equity. And I found this knack that I could throw a process up on the wall and very quickly we could abstract ideas and strategies around it, things that my team, my analysts weren't able to find. They couldn't find it in a spreadsheet. They couldn't find it in a written document. That's how we got off course. So that's really how I got involved in it. I've made a career out of it. I've owned Process Fixer. I've been doing this work for a lot of years. Bought Process Triage, which was one of my competitors. Bought them back in January, and was very fortunate to bring in a methodology that was actually created by one of the biggest companies in the world, that for 30 plus years had been used thousands and thousands of times all across industries. And I was able to acquire that company too and bring that into the sort of pedigree of what we do here. And it's been a lot of fun. We've got about 70 consultants, actually a little over 70 certified in our methods that are out all over the US and South America, out practicing this work and helping companies become more efficient. And I think the most important thing for me as a CEO is giving executives more certainty, because it's the uncertainty that causes the gray hair and it's sort of losing a little bit here too.
So you dive in, a client says, yeah, I think we need some help. And where's a starting point? Because there's
Good question.
processes that occur throughout an organization.
Yes. So what we do, and I'm glad that you asked, because this is my passion is how. Simon Sinek talks about why, I talk about how, because as Simon says, every company knows what, a few know how, there's still no why, start with why. Well, okay, Simon, what's next? Let's get to this thing, right? So how is what I'm passionate about. And I think it really depends upon the angle. I do a lot of public speaking. I'll do close to 100 public speaking engagements between now and the end of next year. A lot of those are for organizations like Vistage. So I'm in a room for a few hours with a bunch of CEOs. And what I find is this, there's a couple different angles. If I get a call from a company and they say, something's not right, and that's usually when you look at processes, when something's not right, we'll try to get with what we call the believables. These are the frontline people in the company that actually do the work. This is Susan in accounting, that when you really screw something up, you go in her office and you close the door and you go, Susan, I need help, right? Well, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for those believables. And we're asking them to show us the actions, the work that they do, and the results of that work, mapping that out. Then we're saying to them, show us from your experience where you have observed things happening that shouldn't be happening. Really simple. Where is there pain in the process that shouldn't be there? And that's, David, that's things like 6 mechanics sharing one set of tools because they're being conscious about spending money. So I'm like, well, what do the other 5 mechanics do all day? They're like, well, they just stand around and wait for the tools. Like, well, I'll go to Harbor Freight and buy the tools. Yeah. So really silly. We have a $500 million HVAC company. 40% of first visits for their technicians, they have the wrong information, the wrong tools, or the wrong materials loaded on their truck, and they have to turn around and go the whole way back. 40% of the time that happens. Hello, stop doing that. You'll make way more money. And this is a wildly profitable company. So if it's, I need to figure out what's going on and I need an emissary to step in and figure this out, I'm starting with the believables. We're doing a triage workshop, a full day where we're bringing them together. We're having them map the process, express their pain. We're teaching them how to analyze and design solutions and remedies for that, like you would teach an engineer, taking them through critical thinking exercises, extracting that from this is a person ringing the cash register. That's where we start on that side.
Walk me through an actual client.
So,
So instead of going big picture and here's the template, give me an example. I don't care what business they're in. I mean, I work with a lot
Great
of
example.
IT people, but it doesn't have to be IT.
Okay,
It can be anybody.
I have one because I have a meeting 2 hours from now that I'm walking them through this map. So we just printed it. It's fresh off the presses laying behind me. The example that I want to give is a medical facility. They've been around for 35 years. They get 1,100 referrals a month from doctors. They receive those files. And this is me bringing, the CEO told me, we're dealing with profit fade. We can't figure out where this profit is going. We have all these people and we keep throwing more bodies at it, but the work just doesn't seem like we're getting the results we should. So what we did is we brought together people from scheduling, people from the clinics. We brought together about 8 people. We sat them in a room. We said, look, we're going to map out. Here's our starting and ending. The starting point is we get that lead from a doctor. The ending point is we're billing accounting. So we ask them, show us how it's done. And we teach them a little bit of a methodology. We facilitate that up on the wall. And within an hour, I realize that we've already found the problem, but I don't want to expose everybody. I'm like, let's go through the method, right? But the method here is let's get them to put the map up and then let's explain to them what pain is. And pain isn't Joe's a jerk. Pain is the system doesn't work right. These are things that just need to be fixed. So they come up with that list. Then we teach them this method of triage where we just ask them 5 simple questions. Does that pain, you not having the right tools, does that inhibit the capability of the process? Yeah, I can't do my work. Do you know the most likely cause? Then somebody needs to analyze a solution for that, right? We need to get an analyst to look at it. Yeah, I do know the most likely cause. Is there an existing best practice tool or method that should be being used? No. So we need to design an existing best practice. If they have a best practice, well, has everybody been trained? Well, it's been a few years. Okay, then it's a training problem. So we walk them through that. Now, in this instance with this client, we did that and we came up with 30 things that the employees had identified that were slowing the work down. And they felt like they could do 20% more work if we could resolve these things.
Because I have a very small brain. I won't remember. So first of all, I want to come back to that one. But you said that within an hour, you kind of know the big thing that's wrong.
I did in this instance.
You get it. Okay.
Yeah.
In this instance. However, you let it go. You didn't mention this, but I'm suspecting is part of the reason you let it go is that although you know the big pain point, you're letting it go because you know that if the conversation continues, you're going to pick up another 5, 10, 20 things that are going to come out that may be smaller, but they're contributors. Is that part of the reason you let it go?
That's 100% correct. I also recognize that when I bring believables into a room, the first thing I tell them is you are here because you are the voice of the process. The executives hand selected you. And a lot of times, I'm going to be honest, when I pick who those triagers are and we call them triagers or believables. When I'm working with an executive team and they're like, who should we send? I'm like, send the people that complain the most. Because they'll at least tell me you've shut them up for too long. They will that genie will get unbottled and it gets a little crazy, but they start throwing these things out. And I'm like, nope, that's a people problem. We're not talking about that. We're talking about what's wrong with the process. Oh yeah. Well, oh, okay. It's this, right? So I keep them going. Now, I saw this problem early in the process, but we wanted to keep them going because I also recognized that when I exposed what that problem really was, the solution to it was going to be simple, but there was going to be repercussions. And in that instance, what it was this. They got all of these leads. They came in, they had a 14-person team that built a case file, and then a doctor overlooked the case file to determine, is this a right patient for us? And they communicated back with the referring physician and maybe requested more tests. And then we got all of these things. Then we called and spent 3 or 4 hours getting an insurance approval. And then we called the customer and said, would you like an appointment? Only 30% of people said yes. So as we moved out of that department into the next department, we said, what's the start of your process? They said, we call and 70% of people say, I don't want an appointment. So we're like, well, what's the next step? And they're like, oh, we have to shred all the files. So every day, hundreds of these files, every week, hundreds of these files, we're running through these shredders. And you can imagine, here's the people that do all this amazing work of getting it approved by insurance. And they're sitting there going, I'm sorry, did you just say that you throw away 70% of our work? And this other department's going, oh, well, that's just in the first pass. By the time we're done, we throw 80 to 90% of your work away. So I could see right there that the problem in the process wasn't all of the steps. The problem was we needed to call the patient first and say, David, I have a referral from your doctor. Would you like an appointment? I ain't coming in there for no appointment. Okay, I don't need to do 40 hours of work on that file. So we saw that. I never mentioned it to the people in the room. Why? Because if I had, they would have gotten very defensive, right? Because I just potentially threatened their job. Now all of a sudden they're like, well, what do you need all these people for? But I understand these bottlenecks enough that I know if you break a beaver dam in the river 500 yards upstream, things are going to come to us. So it's not like all these people are going to lose their job. They're just going to have to move into different roles in the process. And that is the change that we suggested their CEO. It's like, look, call the patient first. We brought in a performance psychologist and we said, let's figure out 3 questions that we could ask and that will determine the probability that that person will show up for their appointments, that they'll follow through, that they'll do all the steps. So now we're asking these questions like, how is this affecting your life, this condition? Oh, wow, I can't go back to work until, let me move you through the process more quickly because it's affecting your life. You know, for the person that's like, my wife's been saying for years, I need to come in there and that, you know, I ain't doing this, but I'm going to go because it'll, you know, she won't be mad anymore. I don't know about that one. You know, I might put that guy in a category 2 or 3. So that's what we're finding. And I got to tell you, David, it's all the time where we find companies, and these are not companies that are struggling. We just did a bunch of work with the company that won the best place to work in the Southwest. And this is a wildly profitable company with very engaged employees, very well-known, fast growth. We found that 80% of the time, when orders came into the system, they were lacking critical information needed to fulfill the order. And then the ops team had to call the customer. And about 20% of the time, the customer canceled the order because they were so upset that it was delayed. So it's like, wait a second, you're wildly successful and wildly profitable. And literally every day you throw away about 16% of your customers, just throw them in the trash. They just garbage. They canceled their order because they were mad. All we had to do was go into the system and adjust the settings to get the paperwork to print.
Let me go back to the medical company. It's got like 30, that you identified. One major one, approximately. So what happened? Those people complained or raised concerns about any of those 30 previously?
Every one of these had been vocalized at some point, and they usually are vocalized to a manager, a frontline manager, and that manager usually has a KPI or an OKR that is associated with some metric that prohibited them from really wanting to make any action on that. And I'll give you a great example. Well, my job is to keep costs low. You're saying you need new computers. I'm not going to give you new computers because I need to keep the costs low, but a new computer would make them 20% more efficient, and they're not making the connection. So sometimes it's, oh, these people complaining again, but many times they rationalize why. Great example, we had a financial services company, this is about 10 years ago, where we actually went into their call center and found that 14% of all time for underwriters, these are, you know, loan underwriters making big money, 14% of their time was waiting for pages in the system to load. We went to IT and we said, why does it take so long? And they said, because of budget cuts. I said, what do you mean? And they said, the software requires 4 gigabytes of RAM. We only bought 2. And it's $28 a person to upgrade that. And I'm like, yeah, but 14% of all of the time for everybody on this floor is spent waiting. And I said, you got to go to the CEO and say this. And they said, no, he's real up. He's like, keep expenses low. I'm trying to maximize margins. If anybody brings up spending money, I'm going to cut your head off. And he was really upset about it. Well, you can imagine how upset he was when I went to him and read him the riot act and said, I can get an extra 14% productivity out of this floor. You don't need to hire any new people. All you and I have to do is drive to Best Buy. We're going to spend about $1,000. It's going to cost you $1,000 to increase productivity in your company by this much. And he's like, why didn't anybody ever say anything? I said, because you threatened their lives. Like, I'm not going to say anything. We have this, I don't know why we forget that we are animals. We have a limbic system. We cannot identify the difference between an angry CEO and an angry grizzly bear. They are both the same thing in our limbic response. We as leaders set this tone and we say, well, you can't do this or you shouldn't do this. Well, there are exceptions to that. And if we don't express that and say, hey, look, we want to keep expenses low, but so if you need to spend some money, let's do an ROI analysis. Like if you need help doing that, let's bring a business analyst in and figure it out. But we forget that. And we're like, well, keep costs low. So for a few dollars, you could make it more efficient.
Let's stay there for a moment. So you say that you come in and you say, give me the believables.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to work with those people. They know what's going on. They're frontline, right?
Frontline. Yeah.
But how do you, and I don't know whether you offer any leadership training, but so how do you work with the leaders? You know, I told you early on, okay, I didn't know systems. And I was trained as a kid. I know how to shake somebody's hand, look them in the eye. I know how to engage. Okay. And I knew how to look like a leader.
Yeah.
But after my .com went .bomb in 2002, I realized, man, I got leadership attributes, but no skills. And it was the system side, which of course is almost a synonym for
Yeah.
process. So how do you help these leaders not just understand what you're saying, but deeply comprehend like a 2x4 across the forehead that, oh man, I got to change.
I have a number of different exercises I use, and you know these are CEOs, so you have to dumb it down for them. And I talk to CEOs all the time, and I say that, and everybody laughs because it's like we have very short attention spans, right? I mean, very short attention. So we've got to have things to your point. They have to be the 2x4 across the head. One of the things that I like to do is I love to and because I do a lot of Vistage speaking and I get to do a couple of hour workshops, I love talking to them about when America was truly great. 1942 to 1947, 400% increase in GDP, unemployment rate of 1%, wages for blue collar workers doubled in the course of 5 years. In 1939, the US had the 39th largest military in the world. Our pride and joy of our military in 1939 was 50,000 cavalry troops, and we had no mechanized artillery, meaning horses. We had a horse-drawn artillery. This is 18 months before Pearl Harbor. And somehow, from 1942 to 1947, there was this incredible transition where we became this world power, this domineering force. And then I remind them that all middle management had been shipped overseas as captains and sergeants and lieutenants.
I want you to stay there with that World War II thing
Yeah.
because that's really powerful. I have no idea. I'm going to give you the gratis here that you got the facts right. But the key is what drove the ability of the USA to go from where you're saying in 1939,
39,
where they're avoiding joining the war, to 1942 to 1947. What galvanized them?
Yes. So think about it. The setup is all the middle management gets shipped overseas. All the big strapping guys got shipped overseas. CEOs were left with a bunch of women and a bunch of 12 to 16-year-old kids. You could drop out of school at 12 years old during the war to work in factories. So all of a sudden, you had a flat organization where a CEO was working hand in hand with a bunch of women and kids, and they're the ones that grew the economy by that much. So it wasn't people that look like you and I. It was they were passionate about winning the war. Their husbands, their fathers were there. So they had that why. But because Ford said it himself, because their hands were smaller, we had to rethink everything. Women's hands are much smaller. So they couldn't use the tools. So it was CEOs had to go to the front line. They had to stand there side by side. And I love to exaggerate this story. I'm like, I can imagine Ford standing at the line and you know saying to these women, oh, what resources can I give you? And he goes and he gets some smaller tools and he brings it back and he thinks they're going to applaud or something. And they're like, hey, here's a list. Go fetch, go get us more stuff. But we as leaders, the only way we could run our business was to provide resources to the frontline people and hear directly from them. And during that time, we've radically altered the course of history. Now, here's the best part about that story. We forget that after the war, we went back to the old method. And guess who copied the method that the US used? The same guy who created it here in the US, W. Edwards Deming, was rejected in the US after the war, went to Japan, spent 30 years there teaching the Japanese how to whoop our butt. Using
it took them a little bit, but then they got warmed up. But let me go back to the why piece too.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think like what you said this earlier, they are so intricately intertwined. The why, not only the how leveled the organization.
Sure did.
But the why leveled and united everyone's hearts.
It did.
Together, that we've got to do this together or we cease to exist as an independent nation. I would suggest we're not going to go down this path. I would suggest we're in the same boat right now.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly.
If we as a nation cannot come back and agree on our why, and starting with some common values, I have my own version that I'd love to see adopted, but
me too.
We can't get back to common values, then this experiment is over.
It is.
But rather than dwell on that, which you and I, we probably could talk for hours, but staying here on the leadership, the biz side.
Yeah.
So you've got your why. So super important, whether you want to credit Simon or your
Yeah.
story's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I need to look that up.
Yeah,
But
I'm actually writing about it in my new book. So we're actually sourcing
oh,
all this. And some of this is hard to find because these were letters like Deming wrote to the CEO of Ford and 46. It's like
yeah,
you
yeah.
got to find, and some of them are like his grandkids telling the story of what he said to Ford, right? So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like some
Yeah.
of it's legend at this point, right?
Yeah.
But the lesson from it is just incredibly powerful that they had the why, but they needed the how, and they got the
Yeah. And you
how.
can't do one
Yeah,
without the other.
you can't. You can listen. You can go. You can be very passionate and go to the poorhouse, right?
Yeah. Oh,
But
I've been there.
but
I've been there, done
yeah,
that.
I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
too. So it's really about understanding how things worked and having guys like Ford stand at the line and look at women and go, "Oh, their hands are different than mine. Oh, they didn't grow up with dads who showed them how to turn a wrench. They don't know what a wrench is. We have to train them differently. There's actually some great videos on YouTube about how to train employees in the 1940s. And they're a little sexist in some instances, but they're very empowering in the sense that they're like these actors where like there's one actor who's a little older, who's more the CEO, and then there's like a younger manager, like a male manager that maybe has a limp because you wanted to show that he couldn't go to war, right? You wanted to show he wasn't a Dodger, right? But these executives saying, look, you have to remember, you're used to dealing with guys that know how to turn a wrench. You're used to dealing with guys that know how to take bolts off. These women have never done this before. They've been, now they're saying this today in our minds, it's very derogatory. But think about it. Women didn't work.
I went to the gym years ago, this is like 20, 30 years, and there were two Bobs. One was an older Bob, white guy, nice guy, in great shape. And then there was Big Bob. Big Bob was like a 6'2" Asian dude who was built like a comic caricature. I mean, total V, super nice guy. He got a job with the San Francisco Fire Department. And I talked to him a few months into it. And I don't know how it came up, their hiring practices. He's like, look, he said, I'm all for women in the workforce. Okay. But we just hired a woman who's 95 pounds, going to carry a 200-pound man out of a burning building.
That's right.
This is just wrong.
Right.
Yeah. And we don't have to go there. I mean,
but it's a really good point. You have to understand the physicality.
Yeah.
We want equality, of course, but we have to understand that her how is going to be different. You might have to provide her you might have to design, analyze the problem, design a method, a tool to help her do that work, train her in that, and then walk her through it. So it's not sexist. It's the least sexist thing in the world is when these CEOs, like you said, the 2x4 over the head, their realization that this great moment in time that we're all so proud of, there were no guys involved at all. It was a bunch of women and kids that made it happen. And it's sort of a little bit, demasculating there or whatever the word is. You're like,
no, and I think this is really a good point to bring up. It's not at all because everybody was bought into the same values.
Everybody.
And everybody contributed where they could.
They sure did.
That is the key. Is that you get people to contribute where they can contribute best, not because they're a particular gender or their particular race. And we still had race problems in World War II. Regrettably, blacks were treated horribly and American Indians, I believe, also. But that's another issue that's wrong. But you don't put them in certain places because of that. But it's everybody had the same why. And that's why it came together.
It sure did.
There wasn't all this, oh, well, what about this? And oh, what about that? So you're at this why and you've got this company. So first of all, you got to nail the why. And if you haven't figured it out, you got to figure it out. And by the way, I think Chick-fil-A probably still does this. You're probably aware of this. They force their CEO, their C-levels and their executives, they have to go work at a Chick-fil-A franchise. It's either 1 or 2 days a year in a low position, not as a manager. You go peel potatoes.
Undercover
you go
boss.
do whatever.
Yeah, you need to be that undercover boss. Yeah.
And it does what you just talked about.
It does.
Where it opens their eyes like, oh man, I didn't know it was like this.
Go watch Undercover Boss. The reason that we love that show so much as a society is because there's a realization in every one of those episodes where the CEO goes, I know nothing. Like you can just see it in their face. They're like, I had no idea this happens. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's bad. I remember the first one, I think it was the 1-800-Flowers one, where that CEO went into a location and he was real pompous And the woman shows him this tool she's using to squeeze the flours together and like put wire around it. And he goes, "Oh, do you get that tool from corporate?" She goes, "No, the location across town, her husband's an engineer. He designed this. He sells them to all the every franchisee. First thing they do is go buy all these tools from this guy." And he's like, "How do we as the franchisor not know that you guys figured out a better how? Like, how did that not get communicated to us?" So the reason it didn't get communicated is because that conversation is happening on the front line of the company. It's not happening at the board level. And stepping into that front line, I can imagine, I think about this all the time, Ford standing at that line, watching these women work and learning more about his business in 10 minutes than any spreadsheet, that any document could have told him, that any 15th layer of management diffused up to him. But he saw the reality of the work and very quickly changed into providing resources. You know, where I love to use this word, and sometimes CEOs find it offensive. I say, you know, your whole job is just to play go fetch. Your people tell you what they need, make sure it's analyzed properly, and that we have a decision that that's what they need. You go play fetch. And we don't like that. We like to say servant leadership. We don't understand that means we have to serve. You know, we have to go get them what they need. But the byproduct of that, all of a sudden, the quality of the product goes through the roof. The value of the product goes through the roof. People are producing more with less. You know, we have this functional fixedness as executives that we think every problem requires money. There's an old story about from back in my early consulting days about a major retailer that had a problem with a detergent manufacturer. The detergent manufacturer was shipping pallets of product to them, and occasionally about 1 out of every 10,000 boxes would be empty. And that doesn't seem like a big problem, except for the return. When you have hundreds of stores all over the world, you know, getting these things returned and getting credit, and it was this big deal. So the retailer went to the manufacturer and said, "You got to fix it." So they hired McKinsey, you know, as you do, and they brought in a bunch of 15-year-old kids from McKinsey. I joke. I have a nephew that is there.
We're on the same page. Sorry.
I have to be careful, but you know, they brought in these $2,000 an hour 15-year-old kids that walked around for a couple of weeks and came back and said, "You got to tear the whole line out. And you got to put a machine in there that weighs each box." And the executive said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's shut the factory down. Let's rebuild everything, retool the whole thing. And it worked. There was no more problem. The executives called the McKinsey consultants, and I don't know if it was McKinsey or Deloitte, so don't sue me, McKinsey. You know, whoever it was, but they called the consultants in and they said, we'd like to go tour the factory and see this thing in action. So they get out there and they find that the machine has been unplugged. And they see an employee walking past, and one of the executives says, "Why is this machine unplugged?" And they said, "Oh my God, some idiots came in here, put this stupid machine," and they said, "The damn thing jams all the time. There's a mess. We can't hit our production goals." They said, "So we just unplugged it." And he said, "Yeah, but we solved the problem. Why are we not getting the partially filled boxes anymore?" And they said, "Oh, Joe went over to Dollar General on his break. He got a box fan, sat it on a chair here by the line. Anytime an empty one comes down, just blows it off the thing, right?" So all these guys spent millions of dollars. $9 box fan was the solution. All you had to do was ask Joe to run over on his break. But we do this all the time. We sit in the boardroom and we try to analyze the solution to problems. And sometimes I have to remind CEOs, there are steps in your organization that goes down to where the work is done. Yes, I know you might have to brush shoulders with people that don't know how to play golf and don't have a great wine collection, but go down there and just ask them what is happening, and you may be surprised.
Well, I love what you said earlier, where you talked about you're a gopher, but that when people ask you for stuff, you make certain it's right.
Yes.
And then you go do it. You added that line. And I was like,
Absolutely.
oh no, is he going to say you just go do it? And
No.
instead you added a line, which is so critical.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned servant leadership. I actually have a t-shirt that says you can't throw rocks when you're washing feet. And
Boy,
you
that's
know,
true.
you think about servant leadership. That's really what it's in. If you get off of this thinking you're the corrector, you know, I have the
You're
gift
gonna
of
be in trouble.
judgment.
Yeah.
And you get down there, like you're saying, washing feet,
Yeah.
get down, doing that stuff like Chick-fil-A's people going online in line.
Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah, no, I love what you're saying. This is good stuff.
Let me make a point to that, because I think you hit the nail on the head. And it's part of, we started talking about methodology at the beginning of here. When we do this work with the believables, We have them nominate pain points, and then they have to stand up in front of the whole team, that 6 or 8 or 10 people that's standing there, and they have to say, this is what I'm suffering with. It has to be quantifiable. I cannot hear, oh, I hear this all the time. Every time no, none of that stuff. Tell me the number. 50% of the time this happens. Everybody has to agree. They might not agree. One might say it's 75, one might say it's 25, and we have to say, well, let's split the difference, and we negotiate it out. Then we teach them some critical thinking methodology, but they are the front line. We refuse to let them solution. I don't want to hear your solution. I want you to tell me, do I need to analyze something? Do I need to design something for you? Do I need to train on something, or do I need to enforce that training? So I won't let them solution in that room. Listen, there are times where somebody's like, I have a real idea here, and I might write it down and hand it over to the executives, but I don't want them solutioning in the room because they don't have purview. They do not fully understand how the organization runs and the legal requirements and all those kind of things. So what we do is we have a list at the end. I've got a list of 15, 20, 30 things that I take back to the executives and I show them, and I have the employees rank them. What's the number? If you could only get one thing from this, what's it going to be? What's number 2? What's number 3? Because the word priorities is a very interesting word because it didn't exist 75 years ago. The plural of the word is priority. Some business guru made it priorities, but that word didn't exist for the beginning.
Yeah, I think I heard that recently somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So figure out, put this in an order of priorities, hand it back over to the executives and say, look, here's what the remedies that your people think. Now, some of these might be really simple. Hey, can you fix this? Can we get another login to the system? Start solving some of this problem and communicate back out with them and say, hey, we heard you. Thank you so much. You know what? Number 2 on the list, unfortunately, regulatory issues prohibit us from doing that. Thank you so much for the wonderful suggestion. Sometimes you might analyze the problem and actually get the employees in the room and say, hey, we need the believables back. Tell us why that happened. What do you think? What kind of things could happen from this? But that's really important, that list isn't just you go do it. Many times you have to analyze that. We use another method, and this is the method I used before I purchased process triage. I would set up big cardboard Kanban boards out on the floor throughout the business. And I would ask people to nominate suggestions on how to improve the work. And I'd focus them. I'd say, I want to think, how could we reduce energy use at our factory? How could we, we deliver in 7 days. How could we do it in 6 days? Ask them for their ideas. They put those ideas up on a board. And then once a week, those employees come together. They read through all the ideas. Then I give them each five tokens, pennies. We lay all the ideas out and we say, everybody gets 5 votes. I'm going to put all 5 of mine on this. I think this is, I'm going to put 2 on here and 3 on here. And they and then I take those top 3 ideas. Now I'm paying attention, because that wasn't just Dave said this. That was Dave said it. And the 40 employees all said, this is the one, man. We need this done. Now I can walk back to that CEO and I can say, we need to resource a solution here. And then, listen, here's the best part. When you fix any of these things, there is no resistance, because it's their idea. It's not HQ said. It's we brought this up. You took it on. You fixed it. And many times I will ask them, and we had one, just blew me away back in December. This company's doing $750 million a year. Simple problem. And I said, if we could fix this, what could you guys do? They said, we'd easily do, I don't know, another $150 million in sales if you could fix this one thing that'll take about 15 minutes. And I went to the CEO and she said, there's no way we'll get another 150. She's like, they got to be at least 50% wrong. I'm like, okay, so 75 million then. Why would you not? Let's assume they're 90% wrong.
Yeah.
Do it. But then on top of that, you're going to get this amazing culture of people going, they go home from work and instead, how was your day, honey? Yeah, whatever. It's like, you won't believe this. We had this idea and we put it together and we came up with some solutions and we sent it to, and she did it. And like, that's pretty cool. Well, I thought you were looking to go work someplace else. No, I might stick it out a few more weeks here and see how this is working. So, recognizing that power of the executive and the frontline person working together hand in hand, creating a culture of continuous improvement and employee empowerment. To me, it's revolutionary, and it's not a new idea. It's the idea.
Well, I think your ownership piece is really important. So when I go in and I work with companies, if employees have already had goals, which we call targets, then I say, okay, well, I want to teach them how to set clear, measurable, time-bound targets. Yeah. And I want them to draft the targets.
Yes.
For the reason you brought up. Now, you can tweak them, Okay, you can edit them, but when they do the first draft, then they own it more. Whereas when you bring down the tablets from the mountain, they're going, oh, okay. They're not buying in or whatever. Yeah. Let me go back to something else now.
Yeah.
You talked about you're meeting with the team and the believables. You meet with the believables and you don't go for, oh, well, I hear this and I hear that. Are you ever in a situation where they say, okay, here are the believables. You got them all. And then you go meet with them and they're mentioning, oh, well, Sarah knows about that. You then go say, oh, we need Sarah in the room.
Yeah, we've done that. We try to plan, but we have done that. And we've also done it where we're like, well, let's finish the map. We got a little hole in here. We'll give Sarah a call next week and we'll show her the map. We'll show her the pain. We'll say, hey, Sarah, did you experience oh, you know what? I experienced it a little differently than that. So what we're, the funny thing is this, a lot of people think because we talk about process that we're a process mapping company. Rosie Rosenberger, who created the process triage methodology in 1993 that we just recently bought, he used to say that maps have no purpose other than to give people a place to hang their pain, to start talking about the process. Because up to that point, I got to tell you, I'm shocked how many times I have a team that's worked together for 25 years. That's the first time they've ever seen their process in that way. And the workshop's done at 5:00 and it's 6:15. And I'm like, you guys need to vamonos. Like they're still hanging around at the wall going, what if we this way? Wow, what if we could change this? And it's that abstraction that's just really powerful. It's the tool that, we see all these old cave paintings. I talk about this all the time is, we see all these old cave paintings and we say, oh, that's human art. Like, no, it's not. It's a board meeting. There's somebody there with a stick going, lion over here, deer over here. You take spear, go around the back of the mountain. Like we look at this and go, oh, it's artwork. I'm like, no, that was literally creating civilization management 101 by the light of the fire, Fred Flintstone up there with a pointy stick pointing things out. That's abstraction. And you cannot abstract from a financial statement. You can. You got to have a good financial mind to abstract from a financial statement. You got to have a good why to understand a written paragraph and really let that thing inspire you. Boy, when you see a map and you see how it all connects real quickly, your mind starts going 1 + 1. I mean, pattern recognition is what we're so good at as a species. Well, maybe we should use patterns in business on occasion. I don't know. Maybe it's a brand new concept, but why not use the things that evolutionarily we used as a species to take us out of the cave and put us in the castle? It seems to make sense, but for some reason we've lost.
It's interesting how you led to my next question. So talk about evolution. There's a lot of hype right now on AI. I'm not in the big enthusiastic crowd. I know there's a place for it.
Yeah,
but one of the things that you mentioned is, what is the process for evaluating AI and how it can affect your organization, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes.
But why don't you, since that's a hot topic, why don't you touch on that? I mean, but AI is going to do my process for me, isn't it?
No. It is absolutely not. If you think about, listen, AI is just remixing records faster, right? If you think about it, there are no new ideas that AI can create. It is impossible. It can only do what it's been trained to do. It can only read. It can only, there's some AI vision and things like that. But all it's doing is just doing that processing faster. There is no answer that AI has given me. And I use AI a lot. And we actually implement AI with clients. There's no answer that I couldn't have found on my own. The AI just found it in a fraction of a second, and it might have took me 15 years to find it, right? And I had to get all these documents and put them up on the wall. So it's going faster. But if your process has not been mined and the pain removed from it, then you're stuck in a situation. We've all heard the story about the SHIT and the fan, right? If it's going to hit the fan, do we really want to speed the blades up and make it go faster? No, I think we want to slow the fan down and remove the feces from the process. So if you want to automate a process, I'm all for that. But my God, do not allow there to be any pain or any broken stuff in there, because doing things poorly more quickly is not a real good strategy. So that's my belief on AI. And we have actually multiple consultants that work with us that are AI consultants that use our methods to go out to clients and say, I refuse to bring AI into your organization until I can see a process map and I can hear from all the people that touch the process, and we can remove all of the pain from them. We can remedy those pains. Then we can see what we can speed up. But my God, you don't go drive a car 300 miles an hour without checking tire pressure and oil first. You have
It's
got
funny.
to fix it.
My first question, I do a lot of interviewing because I have a hiring system that's really solid, and I get hired by clients to interview people. And my first question is, what's more important, knowledge or action, and why? What do you think I'm looking for?
Well, I would say it's action, and why for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
more
what
important,
I
way more
find is
important.
that, and people say, well, what's the right answer? Is it action or knowledge? And I say, well, actually, the smart people say, well, it's got to be action because I can have all the knowledge in the world, but if I don't act on it, nothing
Yeah,
changes. But the flip side is also true. The
it
person will
is.
say, well, it has to be knowledge because of what you just said.
Yeah, right.
Okay. If I don't have the right knowledge right, then I take action. I can actually make it much worse.
Right.
And which is what you just said. So all I do is I look for them not to be a deer in the headlights. Well, I'm not
Yeah.
really sure. You could do action. And, you know, I've had
Yeah.
some candidates that just sit there for a minute and they're like, oh, I don't know. Well, maybe this, and that's all I'm looking for. And I think you make an
Right.
excellent point with AI
Yeah.
is that if you're going to use it in a process way, you got to really get things organized and let it help you kind of more on the fringe. You didn't exactly put it that way,
You're 100%
you
right.
know,
You've got to
then
figure out
it's
where it makes
leading the
sense.
charge.
Yes. And listen, what we haven't yet experienced with AI, but I will tell you it is being experienced by multiple large organizations, is that the data that you train an AI on is very important. And if
Oh,
you
yeah.
don't correct that data when it comes out wrong, it then gets embedded into it. And there is a case study. It's probably another 2 years before people will really know about it. But there's a major corporation right now that found that their AI was 98% efficient when they launched it. Last I heard, it was 94%. Right. So it is getting worse. It's not learned, it's learned, but because we didn't know the answer ourselves, when it gave us the answer and we accepted that, the AI said, oh, well, obviously Dave knows. He's the expert. I mean, my God, nobody trusts me. I'm a machine, for God's sakes. Well, and then it folds that back in, and then it reinforces that position. And now all
Yeah.
of a sudden, at some point, that AI is not going to be worth anything because
Yeah.
it's not trained on the right information.
Yeah, bad data in, and it reminds me of my favorite series, A Person of Interest on Amazon. Have you seen that at all?
I've seen it. It's in our queue, but we watched, I think, one episode and we were like, we're coming back to this.
Oh yeah, no, we're in the 5th season, so we're
Okay,
gonna finish
great.
this
Wow.
out. My wife and I, and we're
Yeah,
gonna
my
go
wife's
back
a
and
big
watch
fan.
the whole thing again. And I don't watch
Mm.
TV, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the writing is so good, except for one episode I didn't like. There's 2 machines.
Hmm.
You don't know that early on, so I'm sorry I told you.
Oh, yeah, it's okay. You just put the cat out of the
But
bag. The whole internet
one
knows
has
now.
been trained by Harold, who's the guy you
Yeah.
saw in the first episode,
Yeah. Yep.
to be a kind machine, a benevolent machine. And the second machine that comes along is not trained like that.
Mm.
There's this great dynamic, and they are both, and this was done 10 years ago, okay, or longer. The series and the machine is AI.
Wow. That's
Both
cool.
machines are AI. And so it's a great series. I did not
Yeah,
like.
I need
But
to binge
other than
watch. I
that,
don't watch a
man,
lot of TV, but I love, yeah, I love finding a
oh,
good show like that.
yeah,
So
yeah. No, my wife and I love it.
so there's an interesting point I want to make too, because I think, you said something early on about how we do need to come together as a society. And I think the story of Deming is really important because Deming discovered some amazing things in the 1940s. And, if you really do the research and look, Deming then went to Japan and helped them create that system. And in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, just whooped our butts with it. And, the funny thing is the guys like Lee Iacocca stood in front of Congress and said, it's this cheap Japanese labor. And Deming was going, nope, we pay like 20% more than you guys do. Like, it's not cheap labor. Like we pay more than you do. They guarantee lifetime employment in those Japanese factories after the 1940s because of the war.
Yeah.
But here's where I think there was a breakdown in our society around Deming's ideas and solutions. These guys came back from the war, victorious, thinking that command and control, which is the way the battlefield is run, was the solution. So guys like Jack Welch really adopted that, and Drucker, and they really went forward with this command and control mentality. And there's not a lot of writing about it, but there's a few different articles talking about Deming and saying his ideas are Marxist. These are communist ideas. And that was really popular. Like right in that late after the war, everybody was so worried about communism, where people were like, this going down to the front line and like talking to people and empowering them, that sounds a little bit like the Russians. And then, he goes to Japan. In Japan, he's embraced because the Japanese are defeated. They know
Yeah.
that their system doesn't work. They're like, we just need a new idea, right? And they're like, this is the guy who figured out how to whoop our butt. He probably has some good ideas. And fortunately, guys like T. Chiono are there at the time, and they all start to work together and realize that they could build this incredible system together. But it's sad that the idea was really rejected here from an undertone around communism and Marxism. And now we look at that today, where we focus on culture and we're servant leaders, and we can look back at those lessons and we can go, that was just plain common sense, right? It wasn't Marxism, right? It was just common sense. But listen, if I'm a general and I'm coming back after the war and I don't have a job anymore and I'd like to get a CEO role, command and control is my method, baby. I yell duck and you do.
And I think that, I'm 67. And one of the things I've learned in recent years that I never knew is that, at least this is a teaching by some, I heard it from Danny Silk first, that there are two major emotions. There's love. And what do you think the opposite one is?
Hate, I've got to think, right?
Yeah, you're close. But the opposite one is fear.
Fear. You know what?
Hate comes from fear.
I got it now. Yeah. It's love.
Anger comes from fear. Racism comes from fear.
All of it comes
Bias
from fear.
comes from fear. So when I hear you talking, I'm hearing that, there was a lot of fear back then, and fear drove some very bad decisions. And
really
in recent years, in recent years, I've come to the realization, and I won't go into the story why, but I've developed what I call good cop leadership style. Good cop, bad cop negotiation style. Yeah. Sure. All right. So, there's nice cop, just like, hey, I'm going to take care of you, work with me. If not, I'm going to turn you over to my partner who's going to break your kneecaps. Yeah. So what I teach is that anybody in the organization, it is a leadership approach, but anybody in the organization and in life can do this. And it's very fulfilling and meaningful, is that you're always the good cop. But the bad cop is, we can't break policy. We can't break the law. If we do that, the product will be late. If we do that, we don't live up to our values. Rarely a person.
Yeah.
But the key, if you're a good cop leader, that those guys didn't know coming back from the war, was that the boundaries have to be firm.
They sure do.
But you always blame it on something else. Like, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I want to help you, but I can't. And so that can really make a huge change. Now that we're getting warmed up for about an hour, but why don't you close this out? I mean, I think you've got some great stuff, Derrick. I'm really pleased you came on the show. I'm thankful.
Thank you for
you and I'm sure we could go out and solve America's problems by putting together a team. It's going to take a team. And just bring us back together, which would be a wonderful thing. We're never going to agree on 100% of stuff, but we got to get back to some core values. But sorry, get me back on track. How you want to sign this off? How do people learn more about what you're doing? I love what you're doing.
Say, Dave, I really believe it's a movement. And we talk about this all the time. It's like this idea that maybe there's a better way. I think it's Zizek right now, the Czechoslovakian philosopher, recently said, it's much easier to think of how the end of the world will happen than it is to think about how the end of capitalism will happen. And I think that's a really powerful thing, right? We can all think of 50 ways that the world might end, but we can't think about a different approach to capitalism. I'm a capitalist, but I also look back and I say, if we truly want to be great again as a nation, as a world, maybe some of the ideas from the past we need to re-embrace, and maybe we need to modernize those, because I do believe we're operating 20th century businesses with 21st century technology. And we need new approaches to management. And that requires us to do a little bit of critical thinking. It requires us to, instead of having a telescope, get a microscope. Instead of having vision of the future, maybe look a little bit closer at what we're doing right now and saying, how do we improve these things? And to me, that's what it's really all about. And this is what I'm out talking about all the time. And you can find out more at theprocessfixer.com. I'm on all the social platforms and out regularly talking about these topics, primarily to CEO groups, because I got to tell you that, I'm writing a new book right now called How, and working with a publisher, and they're like, oh, it doesn't have a broad enough audience. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I don't care. I need to win the hearts and minds of CEOs. I don't need to win the frontline employees right now. I need them to understand that, there are people in your organization that have incredible knowledge of your business. If you had that knowledge, you could do things with your business that you can't do right now. So that's what I'm really passionate about. And thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you very much, Derrick. Wish you the best. Look forward to when we connect again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.